Hello everyone and welcome to this Facebook Live Ready to Vote event. Ready to Vote is designed to help facilitate the discussion around one of the most important activities we have as citizens, and that's voting. My name is Tabitha Safdie and I'm joined here with Caitlin Park, who will be monitoring our conversation online and adding your voice to this discussion. I'm joined here with a group of South Carolina students, and the goal of tonight's discussion is to gain a better understanding of different viewpoints and life experiences the other person is sharing. Tonight we're doing that on the backdrop of the gubernatorial race. Earlier we heard from the Democratic candidates, and I want to hear what everyone thinks about tonight's debate. So, what were your thoughts on tonight's debate?
Well, I thought they covered a very well. Michael Fields, I'm a Benedict College student. I thought they conversated over a broad, different topics, but what was dear to me that I thought they should have talked about was the criminal justice reform, not just reforming it, reconstruction, because I believe there's a direct correlation between the criminal justice system and even the unemployment rate, because of many of people have minor offenses that hinders them from being able to get jobs. So that's one thing that I wish they would, or I was willing to hear them talk about and to discuss tonight.
Anybody else?
Ivan Foster. I'm a Benedict student. And one thing I can say I like about the debate is I believe we need a change in transportation. Like, for example, the potholes in the road, new good bus drivers that's willing to, give the government or people a better way to work. Because everyone needs to go to work. If you don't work, you can't get paid, can't do anything. Another thing I would say is about job opportunities. Everyone needs a job opportunity, and poverty right now, people are really low on poverty, and poverty needs a way to come up. It's kind of like I've rolled around in South Carolina, and it's some environments that you think might need help in that environment, or they might need a person to guide them in a different way. And another thing I would say about South Carolina is we need a change in, I would say, gang activity. I'm not affiliated in any gangs, but we need a change. We need to stop with the violence in the community. That's all I have to say.
Anybody else?
My name's Sarah Hennett. I'll be graduating from Drew High School June 7th. But during the debate tonight, I really wish they had talked about immigration issues, LGBT issues, and the prison reform as well. I feel like they're often glanced over because they're not seen as large issues, especially in South Carolina.
I would like to add in something as well. My name is Richard Dorman Jr., and I will be graduating from Macon High School in a couple of days. One thing that I really liked that they talked about was education reform in the state of South Carolina, because we are one of the lowest in the nation in terms of education, especially in our rural schools. We don't have funding equity in this state. We have school districts currently that are struggling to even recruit new teachers and replace some of the old ones and keep the pay competitive, and they end up losing out on it. Another thing that I wish they would talk more about, though, is the cost of post-secondary education in the state of South Carolina. A couple of days ago, I was looking at what the cost of college is in the state of South Carolina, because I'm going to be going to USC next year, and I'm going to be paying everything included, $27,000 a year at USC. I was looking at the Life Scholarship, and about 20 years ago, Life could essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, cover almost the full cost of tuition at Carolina, which is, most of the way getting you through, paying through everything. Today it can't even cover half of that, and that's going to tremendously negatively affect education in our state, and also job growth as well, because people are coming out with all this debt. They're not going to be able to get on their feet. They're not going to be able to get to work as easily. Another thing that they actually talked about in the debate was lack of transportation. You know, jobs come in, but we have a lot of rural parts of South Carolina where you need to have a car or something just to be able to get to work. You're coming out of school with all this debt. You're not going to be able to buy a car or a house or anything like that.
Yeah, so I am Lauren McDowell. I am graduating from Blythewood High School this year, well, tomorrow actually. But I believe that they touched on a lot of really important topics that South Carolinians deal with on a day-to-day basis. However, I think I agree with Sarah on immigration and certainly LGBTQ issues, but most importantly, women's issues, because every day in South Carolina, women are at risk just simply for living. Governor McMaster is continuously attacking Planned Parenthood and institutions that support and protect women. And I think, as I know that it is the Democratic platform to stand up for women's rights, it was something that wasn't touched on tonight, and I find that a little concerning.
You guys have anything to add?
Hi, I'm Vieira Harris, Benedict College junior computer engineering major, and I agree with the things that you guys said as far as education and transportation. One thing that I thought that was interesting about one of the candidates, as them becoming governor, they didn't really see an issue for education being something that they should find as important. But if you're going to be representing us in the state of South Carolina, all issues that are important to South Carolinians is your issue. You know, I feel like if you're going to represent us as South Carolina, you should be worried about everything that has to do with South Carolina. But it was great to see the diversity that each candidate brought. I mean, they're all very unique in their own ways, and I liked what they stood for as far as being true to themselves and not just any and everything. So that was something I took from it.
My name is Rivers Chadwick, and I'm about to graduate from South Aiken High School in a few days. The debate was interesting. There was a lot of talk, but no real solutions to any of the problems, especially for transportation. I drove here from Aiken today, and about nonstop, felt like I was going through speed bumps down the highway, and that was a little ridiculous. They seem to have a lot of talks, but not a lot of solutions. I found that a little bit interesting.
And feel free to chime in on our Facebook page if you want to add to this conversation. School safety has been a huge talking point for the race for governor. Last week there were mentions of one door in and one door out, common sense gun safety reform, and another candidate said an armed resource officer at every school. What are your thoughts on what the candidates have to say on this topic?
My biggest thing for school safety reform is you pretty much have to treat us with the same status as you would your NFL stars, professional athletes, your movie stars, or your politicians. One-way entries with metal detectors and armed guards was a great deterrent and a great safety precaution protecting our students. Also, an armed resource officer for every school. At my school, personally, we have a single SRO who's responsible for the middle school next door, as well as 2 other elementary schools that take about 5 minutes to drive to. That's not safe. We need to get that fixed and arm our schools with the right precautions to prevent any of these massacres.
Chime in a little what you said. I believe even helping prevent it before it happens, a lot of times there's tips, and there's also the people that does these shootings a lot of times also leave signs that, listen, it's leading up to the event. And I think really taking action and making sure that we take every warning seriously and don't take it lightly, so we can prevent these things before it actually happens. So I think proper planning, and as far as taking action to it's hard to take it because it's such a broad, but really taking consideration, I look at it like the Secret Service as far as taking threats from the president. You know, they take everything seriously. So I believe that on the local level, on the school level, when social media and people send tweets and everything, we should take those things seriously and not lightly, and take them as if that person is actually going to actually do something, so we can actually take action before it actually happens.
I think it's a part of a broader discussion. I mean, these candidates from both parties, they go on TV and they start talking about how they want to reform the education system and how we're one of the lowest in the states. And they offer no like viable solutions for issues that are not just to do with funding. They have everything to do with teachers and students and relationships that are built within the institutions that serve the community. And I think when politicians go on TV and they talk about reforming education, and certainly right now in America, they need to also be discussing the school shootings that are happening in our country. And that's something that I think often gets touched on, but tonight it wasn't touched on. And these are students' lives, you know, we need to be protected.
I'd also like to add in on that as well. I agree that with the idea of putting an armed security guard or an SRO in each of the school, or at least something to that nature, but looking more at practical reasons, I feel that putting metal detectors in every single school is going to cause a lot of issues with students trying to flood in. I mean, one, if you're going to only have one entrance, just think about it. A 5A high school, River Bluff High School, one entrance coming in, it just wouldn't work. It's just not possible. But I also think that we need to be taking a long, hard look at our gun control laws right now and what exactly our background checks are covering and what they're not covering, and see if there are things that we can take more in consideration of, such as someone's mental state, and trying to prevent the firearm from getting to that person in the first place. Because at the end of the day, you can still fortify your schools as much as you want, but that's not going to protect you at a concert or at a movie theater or anything like that.
Tom, I want to say, even you said something, mental health. A lot of times, just like anything, it takes, the gun is the object, but it takes the person to pull the trigger. I think a lot of times we don't look at the fact of mental health, which is an actually big thing that a lot of people deal with. And it's not so much talked about in a broad spectrum. And I think even from a matriculating up through grade school, I think we need to implement more programs to help people cope with mental health and be able to let them know how to properly relinquish anger or properly relinquish frustration, and don't take it out using any violence. So I think teaching kids from a young age on how to handle pressure and how to handle issues will help prevent these issues in the future.
And I largely agree with that, but I also think it's important to note the difference between inappropriate behavior or unfortunate circumstances and actual mental illness, both of which are not properly addressed in this state. When we talk about healthcare, mental health care is seldom mentioned in that conversation, and that's not safe. We need to be having healthy conversations. Our legislature needs to be thinking about ways to really serve their constituents, and that means making sure that included in Medicaid expansion or whatever healthcare plans they are providing for us, that they are looking at mental health care, especially if they are using that as a contributing factor to shootings and, you know, violence.
I think we have some comments online.
Sure. Something related to this particular topic that was spoken about a lot in the legislative session this past year was arming teachers. As students, is that something that makes you feel more or less comfortable? And do you feel as though that is a responsibility for teachers?
Well, frankly, I don't think teachers are underpaid, they're understaffed, their classrooms are loaded. It's ridiculous. So the fact, it's not even just about the students, it's about the teachers feeling comfortable enough to be armed in a classroom, which it's not their job to be armed. It's not their job to do what law enforcement does. It's not law enforcement's fault that these things are happening. It's the gun laws that we need to go through and get completely revamped because they're horrible.
To add on, if we are struggling trying to find a solution for the SROs and police officers that are already in place who are trained, who does have this technical ability? How can you put that burden or that responsibility on someone who has no training at all, no foundation, no stability or anything in that? And just as far as teachers, they don't have that mentality as a police officer to have a weapon. So you're asking someone to protect or put somebody in a situation that they have no idea how to handle. I don't think that's the option as well, especially if we're still trying to figure out how to solve that problem with SROs and police officers already in place, with them not being able to figure that out.
I just wanted to add, I feel like with each shooting, people propose solutions, and maybe over time, the solutions are just sort of forced to get more extravagant to get headline attention. And I think arming teachers is a pretty unreasonable solution, and the fact that people are suggesting it is a good indicator that this is a big issue that has been happening too many times.
Well, back on what I was saying earlier as well, we can fortify our schools as much as we want, but it's still not going to protect us in other areas. That's one of the core reasons why I'm against arming teachers. Also because it's fundamentally wrong. It's not their job. I want them to focus on teaching me. I just don't think it's the right thing to do. And it doesn't really send the right message to the students as well. And then also I know that there's a lot of teachers that I've been taught by or gone to school with who simply would easily be overpowered by other students. So I think having the properly trained person in place, an SRO, and it would also be a job that, someone could actually use. Maybe they need that kind of job. That'd be something they could do. So, option we can explore.
With teachers being armed in the classroom, I think it will be causing more problems to the students. They won't be able to learn. They'll be more focused on the safety. But now there are students in the classroom causing trouble, don't want to learn, don't want to do this, don't want to do that. But that causes the teacher to not have proper safety. Then they might want to be armed because students are, doing this and doing that in the classroom.
I would also say that I believe if you arm teachers, that opens up another door to another issue that can happen, another possibility, because teachers are constantly under stress. It's one thing teaching, and it's one thing teaching adolescents and teaching kids that are maybe not stable all the time. So with them having a gun, would that in fact, my question would be, would that in fact maybe trigger something else from having maybe a teacher opening fire on the classroom and just losing it, a teacher having mental illness. So I would believe that arming teachers is, I would believe, kind of, in my opinion, a little radical, knowing the fact that they went to school for education. I'm here to teach education. I didn't go to school for law enforcement. And just like police officers, they have to be constantly trained on tasks and things they do on a daily basis. A teacher teaches on a daily basis. A teacher doesn't shoot. A teacher doesn't address criminals on a daily basis, or even handles guns on a daily basis. So I don't believe arming teacher would be the necessarily smart thing to necessarily do when it comes to giving a teacher a firearm.
And just to add into that, we also had just a couple months ago in the state of Georgia when a teacher locked himself in his room and he fired off his weapon. I don't know the actual circumstances of the situation, but that's not normal.
I think it's also important just to touch on this again is the fact that not everybody who is violent and that shoots a gun has a mental illness. I think that's in the news we see, somebody who shoots up a school and then it says that they're mentally ill, but that's not a cause of somebody deciding to take someone's life. Mental illness is an issue that should be looked at in a nuanced way, and while it does have some correlation to some acts of violence, it's not a complete indicator of such.
Okay, I think we have another.
We do. We actually have several comments here. on our live stream. Something that several of you mentioned that you wish had been discussed was prison reform in the state of South Carolina. Specifically what was asked, can we talk about the school to jail issue and why we're spending so much money on keeping people in prison instead of sending people to school? So do you feel that those two topics are related in the sense that education is not being treated in the way that it needs to be, and that's also creating a prison pipeline essentially in South Carolina?
Well, I believe when it comes to the criminal justice system, I believe we look at it in the wrong way because it's hard to understand how a particular group that's necessarily, in my opinion, targeted due to certain policies that are set in stone that hinders them for, it's almost if I'm a kid, I do kiddish things, and often I shouldn't be, that thing I did as a kid shouldn't follow me the rest of my life. And criminal justice leads to unemployment. You have policies and you have laws for minor crimes that prevent people, that put felonies on people's records, that they're unable to get jobs. You get out of jail and you're still not free because of the fact that you have a record. So in the fact of, I think I'm free, but I'm not because I can't support my family because I cannot have access to government funding or government housing or a good, decent job to support a family, $10 an hour, $12 an hour, making minimum wage. You cannot support a family. So having policies, and I believe that's a little radical, they are radical, and that you put on, it leaves a big after effect that we don't look at oftentimes, and it affects so many areas. Criminal justice affects so many areas. Like I said, the biggest area is unemployment. People get out of jail or are unable to get jobs because of the way that the laws and policies are set up. So I think we need to stop thinking about reform and look at reconstruction, actually reconstructing our criminal justice system.
Would anyone care to add to that question?
With the school to prison scenario that we were talking about, yeah, I think that people of color are definitely targeted in schools, and it kind of spirals into suspensions. It's turned into, what is it? Forgot the word. Expulsion, yeah. And then they just get sent to these schools where they funnel out of there as well. And it just, if you look at the rates of which people of color are expelled from school, they're much higher than white people. And it's something that we definitely need to focus on.
Something to add on that as well. I feel that we need to stop looking at prisons as a place where we put people who break the law, where we put criminals, and what we need to start thinking about it more as a place of a second chance. Now there are some crimes that simply, you can't get a second chance for it. But for other things like, say, simple marijuana possession or simple crimes that really aren't going to hurt too many people, even some others as well. This should be a chance for you to change, to get, I know we have programs in the prisons right now where you can go and learn a trade, you can get some learning and training and education, but when they get out, it's not all of them are going to be able to do something with it if they have that crime pinned to them on their record forever. So we need to treat it more as a place of a second chance so that when they get back into society, they can be productive.
I'd say we definitely need a reform in prison, but it's still also unfair to business owners to not be aware of someone's crimes they have committed. It is the responsibility of the business owner to protect their employees as well as other people, the patrons that come to the business. So they should have access to the records. They can be aware and take any necessary precautions into it.
Well, depending on, of course, if it's something like assault or murder, then yes. If I was a business owner, I would want to make sure that I knew about that. But if it's something like simple drug possession, like marijuana, as long as you're coming to work okay and not, I don't care. Just personal preference.
Yeah, like you said, what we have to draw the line and say is what could be shown and what should be shown. Like you said, if I killed somebody 20 years ago, okay, yes, that should show up on my record. But if I got pulled over for possession of marijuana and with not the intent to distribute, why should that be put on my record? And because we don't look at the person who we're trying to seek employment from, they have certain biases of their own.
Right.
So we have to think, okay, yes, it's not such a black and white. Well, we have to say how would the employer look at this, and what picture or what assumptions would they draw for just something like arrested for possession of marijuana? Their mind might go, well, he probably was a drug dealer. You know, it's too broad to be able to put focus on just put anything on a record, you know, on a personal record, because you don't know the thought process of the person that has to judge you. So.
I think at the end of the day, when you're dealing with the criminal justice system, it comes down to really, first of all, acknowledging the fact that people of color are disproportionately put in prisons, but also when you're looking at it from a government standpoint, really, it is the job of the government to serve the people, and serving the people does not include locking them up in a prison and then not offering them any opportunity to ever provide or to contribute to society. So I think it's the job of the government to really take a step back and think, what do I want from my citizens? What do I want from a community? Do I want a place where you make a mistake and you're locked up forever and it's on your record forever? Or do I want a community and a citizenry that can go out and be virtuous and do good things?
I think one issue that they didn't talk about was police. We don't realize that the first interaction is police. What should they be allowed to do? How should they be allowed to interact, or how should they be allowed to build an assumption based on, you know, the elephant in the room, color? Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of times people of color, particularly blacks, are targeted because it's, I guess, we look like, or the rhetoric, we look like suspects, or just because somebody is wearing baggy clothes and maybe have dreadlocks, they are suspicious of criminal activity. And I think we should draw the line when it comes to what are police, how do police interact with citizens, and what should they be allowed to judge their basis of interaction off of.
I think we also need to take a look at how our prisons, some of them are privately owned, and the way that they're run is very poor. But yeah, just touching on that, the whole idea that we're allowing private businesses to own prisons and conduct them however they want is a really big issue, I think.
One of the things I definitely want to talk about tonight is civility. How do you feel about the deep divisions and incivility we see now in our country, and what can we do to revive civility?
I think one thing we need to do is discourage the kind of campaign commercials that we saw in the state of Georgia. Kemp and Williams with the immigration bus. That is simply unacceptable. That's not what we are. It's not right for our time. I mean, we had what happened in Charlottesville, and it's showing how bad the divide, and honestly, I know this is state politics, but I'm going to go into national as well. I feel like the election of Trump brought up a wing of the Republican Party, or at least the right wing, that had been ignored for a while, or at least had been down for a while. But his election with his rhetoric has just brought them up, and now, I mean, it's unrecognizable anymore. What we have right now, and people are just fighting. It's hard to find common ground on a lot of different issues, and that's what we need to get back to.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I think the 2016 election brought about a division in American politics and just everyday life that I think had been kind of gone for a while, at least to that extreme, and I'd never seen it before in my short years. But I think right now it's kind of, I think we're all kind of on shaky ground, and we're all trying to figure out what's going on, especially young folks who like, for most of us, this is probably the first time we'll ever vote, and it's at such a divisive time where it seems like everybody that you disagree with, that you just should disagree with them on everything, and so it creates this really confusing and hostile environment anywhere you go and talk about politics, and I think that kind of gets counterproductive in our society, where ideally, even though we believe different things, we should have civil discourse and we should get along because, I mean, that's what our country was founded on. The founding fathers didn't lock themselves in rooms for as long as they did to write the Constitution so that we could just all argue all of the time over nothing and never compromise. So I think that's, at the end of the day, we should remember to always try to find that compromise and to find a solution even in the most divisive of times.
I think that's really going to be important in this gubernatorial race, especially on the Democratic side. One thing that I was thinking about while I was listening to the debate is the Democrats, we are the minority party in this state. After this election cycle, it is very likely the GOP will still be in control of the state legislature. So when I'm looking at the three candidates, one of the most important things I want to know is, are you going to be able to work with the GOP if you become governor? Because, I mean, in the state of South Carolina, most of the power is vested within the legislature. So if you're going to be able to get anything big done, you have to go to the legislature. It just cannot go top down. It has to start at the legislature. So, and I mean, talking about the candidates wise, honestly, in my opinion, James Smith has, because he's been in the legislature for so long, because he has all the connections, he knows all the workings of the legislature, and he's worked with Republicans on many bills before. I feel that he is the best candidate in that sense, that if he were to be elected governor, he would have the best chance of working with them and getting some stuff done.
Anyone in the back?
I thought that all of the candidates were uncivil at some points throughout the debate, and it was pretty disappointing to see that. Instead of focusing on issues like stopping corruption, they focused on each other's paper trails, and it was, I don't know, childish.
Yeah, I can agree on that. I mean, if you're going to be the next governor, I feel like the question I would really like to ask, what are you going to do different? I mean, what are you going to do to put South Carolina back on the map out of all of 50 states? What are you going to do to help not only lead the people of South Carolina, but you're still a representative of a state. So how can you make your work, your change, not only impactful for South Carolina, but for the whole nation? And if you're so concerned about what someone else is doing, how can you worry and be concerned about the concerns of the South Carolinians here? So I really wish that they would focus, or will focus more on aspects that really impact us and actually make a difference. Not a minor change, not a little change, but come up with a plan, come up with your target, and actually make a major change, not just a minor change.
Well, one thing I agree with Phil Noble is that just doing the same thing, expecting different results, is the definition of insanity. And one thing I like about him is the fact that he's trying to implement new programs, even from what he said tonight. He's trying to implement new things instead of bringing diversity, not only to South Carolina, but also us being the leading force in it, which in turn would bring change to actually the nation. As far as even looking at it from, he was talking about from the steel point of view, how we get our steel from China, but there's great steel factories here in the state of South Carolina that we can use that can actually benefit our local economy than outsourcing them to another country, which we in reality are not reaping the benefits of it, and especially when it comes to employment.
So what specific actions can these candidates take that would help them create a more positive tone for this election?
I think it comes from them showing their humanity. As far as reaching out with their future constituents, I think it just really comes down to who can you talk to, who can you have a conversation with, whether you know they're going to 100% vote for you or you don't know if they're going to vote at all. You have to have that kind of outreach and kind of be an approachable person regardless of who you're talking to. As far as talking with each other, I mean, it also comes down to just being a decent human being. I mean, you can't run an entire campaign based off of hatred for your own party members or for the other party and then expect afterwards for things to be good. You have to always be civil and work in a civil environment. You can't just go on TV and start yelling horrible, terrible things, or even if they're true, you can't just slander people. and expect things to work in your favor in the future. I mean, that's not how that works. I think it just comes down to having principles and treating people with respect.
Well, just being open, I believe as the new governor, come in with a openness, have the attitude, I don't know what's best for the state. The people know what's best for the state. And have the attitude, okay, and really consider what are the people saying, what are the issues that's constantly being brought up, and actually focus in on that issue instead of thinking that I know as the governor what's best for the citizens, and actually consider what the citizens know what's best for them.
All right, guys. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for coming here and taking part in this conversation. And I want to welcome everyone back tomorrow night. We're going to do this again after the Republican debate. So join us on SCE TV, watch the debate, and then come to SCE TV's Facebook page and watch our discussion with a different batch of students. All right, thanks everyone.